I am Barnaby Smyth, a Foley editor and artist. And I think the first question that needs to be answered is, what is Foley? Well, in 1927, a man named Jack Donovan Foley awoke to a world of film sound. He was working and living in Hollywood as a producer, location scout, stuntman. And he thought to himself, well, if dialogue and music has been added to the soundtrack, why not effects? And Foley was born. Bespoke sounds created in a studio by Foley artists. We helped to create the soundtrack with an array of props in our bare hands. We re-record all the footsteps, man or beast, clothes moved, chair and door creaks, eating, drinking, fighting, love-making, cars crashing, the list goes on and never really ends. A TV and film soundtrack is made up of three distinct elements: the dialogue and music, both very self-explanatory, and the effects. The effects, loosely defined as atmospheres, winds, ticking clocks, car engines, gunshots, animal noises, a lot of which are pre-recorded, lifted from sound libraries. But these days, there's a lot of sound manipulation and sound design which goes on in software such as Pro Tools and Nuendo. But it's the sounds between these three elements that where Foley exists, the organic movement track, uniquely recorded for each TV or film production. Now, breaking down the Foley process itself, there's three main areas. First of all, the moves track. This is cloth, leather, armour, any other material textures we use to imitate body movement. And we lay that down often first as a sort of bed on which to build upon. The second is footsteps, whether that's strolling, sprinting, climbing or descending stairs, on any surface you can imagine, and with any shoe. You'll find me on a constant quest for the ultimate high heel, the ultimate heroic soldier's boot, and I'm sort of with my head in a box in second-hand shops, getting some rather strange looks. I normally justify high heel purchases. I'll just say I work on Downton Abbey, and it generally kind of works. And then the final thing is spot effects, all other incidental sounds, eating, drinking, hand touches, punches, paper movement, right up to elements of huge explosions. And I think these three areas show how diverse Foley is and how it's used to enrich the soundtrack with detail and texture. Okay, so I don't want to sort of theorize and chat too much about Foley. You want to sort of hear Foley and hear what it's about. So what I'm about to do is a live Foley demo. What I've sort of done is I've sort of created a business model, Foley karaoke, which I think could really kind of catch on. I've created a Foley bed, so I've edited, just track laid a 4-minute sequence on which I Foley on top of. So what you're about to hear is not entirely Foley, but it's pre-laid sound effects marrying together with Foley, just as it would do in any TV or film soundtrack. The only difference here is that I'll be performing it live in front of you all, so no pressure there at all. But I recommend, if you can, to shut your eyes. I've put the screens in just because I don't trust all of you. You could shut your eyes and just let your imagination take over, because it's much more powerful, and I think it really helps, because it's quite infectious. You want to see what's going on. But I will part the seas afterwards, and then you'll see what I've been doing. Okay. Maybe lights down for a bit of atmos. Not so much so I can't see. Okay, so I'll just sort of repeat the process, but without the backing track, so just so you can see what was going on. So we started 2 microphones, one with some reverb, one without. So we on this microphone, Becca. So we started with some wind. I mean, we'd normally bring in real leaves and stuff, but the camo net is always a good. They don't dry out or die, so they last forever. So it's a good sort of backing track. So I laid some sort of airy wind in trees, and this just sort of augments it, just gives it a bit of texture. A few owl screeches, that wasn't me. And just timed it so I sort of, third owl screech, there's like a little bird. Bird flies off. And then we started with a horse, some old 35mm bobbins. Don't go with the coconuts always. So start with very distant, bring it forward onto a bit of sort of textured grass, and then as the pre-laid horse sound effects kick in, bring it right forward onto the gravel, pick up some reins just for extra detail so you feel like you're really in there, and then the neigh is my timing to jump off the horse. I'm imagining this is a sort of stately home driveway. I don't know, maybe that's what I'm thinking. So he walks across. Here's a dog howling at a wolf in the distance. Just a turn. So it just binds the Foley with the sound effects. Just pulls the two together. Goes over to the doorway. An old jailer's keys, giving it a bit of period, setting it in a sort of days of yore. Up to the door. Pre-laid sound effect of the door opening. Then we go into a microphone with a bit of reverb, just to imply and infer a interior location. So he puts the keys down, picks up a match, strikes a match. Always use a Swan Vesta, very solid striker, never let you down. Picks up the lantern, walks forward, and then there was I've got pasta all over me. A pre-laid sort of ticking clock in the background, and it sort of pans off, and then you hear a sort of a chime, just giving it a sense of space and movement through the space. And then he's walking, then a gust of wind and a slam, so I react to that. Again, just pulls the two tracks together, bit of tension. And then the sort of no Foley demo is really complete without some blood and guts. So, apologies for the lack of the often requested decapitation. I couldn't carry the watermelon. So we come across a few flies, it's implying some sort of corpse or something nasty. And so I laid some dog sounds. On their own, it just sounds like a dog eating lunch. But then if you add some ripping sort of sinew, the old celery and the overboiled pasta, it's about an hour on the hob last night, I suppose. Keep touching that, it's great for sort of blood and guts and sinew. And then there's a point in which I sort of kick the lantern and the dog sort of reacts. And then we run off to the door. And that was it, really. I don't know, there was a Twitter competition. I don't know if anyone, maybe you didn't see the tweet about what these, but there was just a couple of sound effects. What did we use? And one of them was Alien versus Predator, that film Goliath. It was a face hugger in one of the face huggers in the pods. We used a bit of the pasta, the gooey pasta, and then in Attack the Block, one of the chaps in it gets his face ripped off, so he used the old celery. It was sort of an element of it. There was a massive music cue, unfortunately, so a little bit hard to tell. Well, those are those two competitions. And so that's that. Where are my notes? I'll come back in the light. So that's the Foley demo. So you see how it's created, how it fits with sound effects. One on its own is just a man grappling with fruit and veg, and then sound effects on their own often don't have texture and depth, and Foley really does help with that respect. So the next clip I'm going to play is from a film I worked on, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and this particular sequence will now show how Foley is used to tell a story alongside the moving image. Gary Oldman's character, George Smiley, is alone in a room. It's the climax of the film, an extremely tense moment. I'll play this 2-minute clip 3 times. The first, and it shows, just to show how we used sound to shape the story here. The first is just dialogue, including all location sound, any added dialogue, and the music. So nothing else, just dialogue and music. The sequence is a great example of the power and emotion of sound, and in particular Foley, the power that it brings to the screen. Without the effects and the Foley to guide us through this very tense scene, we'd essentially be watching Gary Oldman sucking mutely on tree-ball mints. So a few more examples of the diversity of Foley productions I've worked on, and it'll just be the Foley I'm playing, nothing else. Firstly, the energy it can bring. So that I mentioned before the movement track, which we lay down. This is a scene from a film called Closed Circuit with Eric Bana, Jim Broadbent, about a terrorist attack on Borough Market. And so the police are raiding a couple of locations in London. And we wanted to add the sense of the coots on the police as they storm into the building. The first, they're kind of creeping around, so it's just the feeling of them in the location. And then the second, they're smashing into this suspect's house. And we wanted that, it's like a sort of zhuzhing sound of their jackets and stuff. And we actually got a rucksack and actually got a fork and just rip the fork across this rucksack, and it gives a sort of it gives a sense of body movement and impetus. So here it is. Okay. So yeah, it definitely added something. It was sort of subtle and buried within dialogue and shouting and music. It is subtle, but it's definitely there. Second of all is a film called Hyde Park and Hudson, starring Bill Murray. And it's a lot more gentle-paced film, all about Franklin Roosevelt. And he, as you know, he was unable to walk, had polio, and he had these metal braces on his legs. And so he would, when not in a wheelchair, he would sort of hop around the house, clinging onto furniture, and the furniture would creak, and everything on the furniture would wobble. And he's having a meeting with King George about trying to get Britain into the Second World War, and he's clutching onto the furniture and the decanters wobbling and stuff. So for a Foley, it's fantastic, and it shows how subtle detail. It's not always about kicking doors in. It's subtle detail really make a scene. Okay. Finally got to do an exhale for Bill Murray, a dream of mine. Okay, so stark contrast to the first, subtle detail, but vital, particularly if there's post-sync lines that create gaps. The Foley just covers these areas and sells any post-sync lines to the audience. Third of all is good old Downton Abbey, which I've been fortunate enough to work on from the start. And it's an example. There's a few sedate scenes similarly, but there's, with the servants in particular, when they're downstairs, maids running around, carrying bowls, making puddings, dropping whatever. An example of just how much Foley there is in a typical scene, and you watch it on telly, and you might just think it's all recorded on location, but pretty much only the dialogue and the occasional footstep is retained from the shoot. Everything is created afterwards. So here we go. So yeah, so full of sound without even having any dialogue, music, post-sync lines. So Foley is that sort of sound bed on which to build other layers. Right, the last two clips I'm going to play are more footstep based. And a lot of people say it's the real sort of art of Foley is creating good footsteps, convincing footsteps. And more and more I'm finding myself outside of the studio and on location, particularly for period pieces, which I find myself doing more and more. This was a film called Jane Eyre with Michael Fassbender. And we went up to a place called Ruton Park, because that's where they shot certain scenes of it. And they've got, because we wanted to create the sound for huge 400-foot drawing rooms and hallways with amazing, 500-year-old wooden boards, and sometimes hard to create on a 3-foot by 3-foot little patch of wood in Soho, and often not very convincing, even if you add reverb. So, and it's an excuse to get out of the studio, which is nice, to spend a bit of time in a stately home. But I think so what I'm about to play is just Foley, no acoustic, no reverb added, a little bit of moves, but mainly footsteps. And this particular chap walking, I actually walked pretty much exactly where he walked, and there's a little creak, which was on the original recording, and I was quite chuffed about that. So my feet pretty much landing where his feet are. So have a listen. For good order. So yeah, it has an acoustic, it has a size, it has a sort of authenticity to it. Maybe not sort of totally apparent if you haven't spent 10 years listening to studio wooden floors, but to me it's quite exciting. So the last clip is also from Jane Eyre, but it shows the difference between studio footsteps. So it's an exterior run. Jane and Mr. Rochester are running in the rain, recorded fairly closely in a studio with a bit of water, and then it cuts into a location, real granite stone stately home with a real live acoustic, and so yeah, no added reverb, so you can hear the difference. Okay. So there you have it. So there is the art of Foley in many forms. In my view, the unseen, often overlooked hero of film and television storytelling. Thank you very much.
So Barnaby, thank you so much for this demonstration.
My
I think
pleasure.
it's very rare to get to see it in action like this. It's very impressive indeed. Have you got any questions for Barnaby? Anyone? Got over there.
I was reading recently about an example with film.
Oh yeah, good Foley, yeah. Loud.
Yeah, very loud.
Loud
And
leather boots.
The leather boots, that's the leather gloves, was it?
sorry.
of the Spanish captain.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering whether you had any examples of stuff that you've worked on where Foley's been used to either exaggerate a feeling or exaggerate, kind of excite a kind of emotion.
Well, yeah, it's kind of what it is really. It sort of draws, everything we do draws your details. I mean, things like that Jane Eyre is a little bit more trying to make it as naturalistic as possible, so you just buy it. So that's almost harder than creating a big leather creaky boot is actually easier than, creating sort of footsteps that you believe is totally real. But one thing we need to talk about Kevin. I don't know if you've seen it, and he eats a lychee, and so we just macro mic this. I mean, we did actually use a lychee rather disappointingly, but lychees sound really good. Often you use something completely different, but lychees, and we discovered that you peel the lychee back, and then if you squeeze it, it actually explodes. There's like a seed that fires out, and there's a bit where he bites in it. It's all kind of a metaphor for the eyeball of his sister, I think. It's all kind of very grim. But yeah, that was a really horrendous. The full screen. It's his mouth eating this lychee. So that was something that springs to mind.
Cool, thank you.
Got Sancha there in the middle.
You showed an example of you breathing out for Bill Murray.
Oh yes.
And I was just wondering, say, if there was a woman in the story, would you try and do that yourself?
I do, yeah. But it's you give it a little bit more to, like maybe a bit more breath, chesting. But also, if it's a film, I edit. If it's that film, I sort of edited it as well, and didn't just perform it. So I'll take it home and maybe manipulate it, pitch it up a couple of semitones, and that's quite convincing as a female breath. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you actually place the music in the film as well, or you're just normally in charge of Foley.
Just no Foley. No, I wouldn't tread on anyone's toes really.
So you normally leave it up to the dubbing mixer to like place.
Yeah. So recently I've just delivered a film out next year, Suffragette, and they're mixing it now. So I sort of deliver the Foley, and then the supervisors take over this, where it is, how much they use, how loud they want it. It's to do with them and the mixer and the director. And so it's, I sometimes pop in to say hello, but it's, too many cooks sometimes. I've been doing it for quite a long time, so at the beginning you get very hurt if all your Foley's not used and some background maid's not heard, and you're like, oh God, they hate me. But it's for whatever's best for the film. Really.
We've got a gentleman down here in the hat.
I was just wondering for the Jane Eyre footsteps.
Yeah.
Was that natural reverb or was that more of a VST?
That's completely natural. So that's just it was recorded. We had sort of a close mic and then a sort of stereo far mic. So used for like walk off. So they walk out of the room, we'd have a stereo Sherps mic sort of pointed away. But on location, you really don't need to point the mic very far, just slightly off axis, and it sounds like it's miles away. So. So it's. Sorry, what was the question? Does that answer the question? I can't. Yeah, so that was all natural. There was no added reverb. Sometimes it can be a problem if it's too much. If the sort of tail of the footstep is like too big a room and the dialogue has a smaller reverb. If it was shot in that room and you're going back to the same acoustic, that's fine. But if I was using that acoustic in a separate film and the two. The reverb tails didn't match, it can cause an issue. But generally it's just generally you buy it because it's just a natural acoustic.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. How do you decide noises that don't exist yet, or of things that don't exist? So, for instance, if you are doing a dinosaur walking, or if you're doing something to do with something that is a completely fantastical notion, how do you, as a Foley artist, decide what that's going to sound like?
Sometimes we have a meeting before with a supervisor or sometimes the director, but normally it's just left up to us, really. You're sort of trusted to... They might just give you some notes and say, I want the feet to be quite crunchy or really heavy or, you know, some detail. But often it's kind of left up to you and to sort of play around, really, which is the sort of great part of this job. Yeah. Don't do many dinosaurs now. It's disappointing.
Hi, yeah. Do you recognise fellow Foley artists' footsteps in films when you watch them?
No, I can't. Or sometimes I've recognised a tone of wood. There's a wood at Shepperton that I sometimes recognise, which is pretty sad. There's a door creak in Shakespeare in Love, which I recognise.
Can you actually watch a film and actually enjoy it without analysing?
Yeah, I do. I'm not some...
And what do you think of
terrible
Barbarian
geek.
Film Studio?
I haven't actually seen it, which is... I really want to see it, and I'm ashamed that I haven't seen it, but... Yeah, no, I really want to see it.
I think 2 more questions?
If you need to add reverb to the Foley, if you record it completely in studio, do you add it, or is it up to the re-recording mixer?
No, generally I wouldn't. If it's... If I was to add something, I recently, bang on about this film, but Suffragette, there was a trolley way in the distance, almost like a sort of sound design moment. This woman's in a cell and you can hear this trolley approaching. I did a very reverbed version of a trolley kind of in space, but I'd give a clean version as well, so if the mixer doesn't like it or it doesn't, you know, tie in with the sound designer's image, then they can sort of ditch it and go with add the reverb they like. But no, generally it's you leave it up to the mixer. I have sort of reverb buses, so I have when I'm editing at home, just so I can see what a foot sounds like with a bit of reverb on it, because sometimes it changes the nature of the sound, and so it's, you know, it can affect how you EQ stuff or, you know, perform it.
Thank you. The last one down. Oh, sorry, someone was saying up there in the corner.
Do you ever want to get more involved in the sound design aspects of it after you've...
A little bit. I mean, I found that because when I first started, Foley was a sort of a company I was at, which is no more, a company called Videosonics. It was a sort of natural progression to other things. You start with Foley. You know, you're a runner, you make the tea, then you do Foley, and then you become, or maybe an assistant, then Foley, then you track laying and do sound design and maybe a mixer. But I sort of got into Foley and then never went on because I just thought it's such an art, it's a real art form, and to get good at it, you have to really kind of stick at it. And so I think you need to kind of commit to it. And there is a certain element of sound design in what you do, layering up, and so in a sense it is sound design. It's more kind of physical, organic kind of way of sourcing the sounds, rather than a bit less sort of. I mean, I use sort of plugins to clean stuff up and manipulate stuff to a certain degree, but sort of 60% of it is in the performance, and then you kind of tweak it at home and edit it.
Now, how much is a percentage would you say is being added by a sound designer to the sound effects of a scene that you watch, beyond the Foley sound that's in there?
It really depends on the scene. It might be 90% sound design, and then the next scene it might be 90% Foley. Do you know what I mean? It's hard to, you know.
So you given notes then to know at what point?
Yeah. So it might be if it's a very affects the track layer. The sound designer might say, "Don't worry, I've covered all this, all the door slams and the powerful stuff. Can you just add some high-end detail on top, so you're not doubling up and we're not wasting time, you know, doing things that have been covered elsewhere."
Great. Thank you so much, Barnaby, for coming, and thanks for all your questions.